This began last November when I checked out Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. After that, I read The Rule by Larry Hite, which happened to be immediately beside, on the new bookshelf, immediately beside Catch and Kill. So in Catch and Kill, which is mostly the very unpleasant story of Ronan Farrow's journalism and at times thwarted journalism concerning Harvey Weinstein and later Matt Lauer. But there's one very funny passage in the book, and that is this. He writes about Lanny Davis, whom I always thought was a pretty good guy, but apparently not recently. He writes, Davis was raised in Jersey City, his father a dentist, his mother a manager in the dental office. At Yale Law School, Davis had become friends with Hillary Rodham and later Bill Clinton. After a failed run for Congress and a few years of legal practice, he'd spun this friendship into a professional role as their most ardent defender in times of scandal and political peril. Then Davis cashed in, taking on jobs that earned him $1 million to lobby his way around Equatorial Guiana's human rights abuses, or $100,000 a month to downplay a patently rigged election in Ivory Coast. If a passenger disappeared and left a smear of blood on the deck of your cruise ship, or the president criticized your football team's racist name, Davis was there. Trying to get a hold of Davis later on, I asked Jonathan who would have Lanny Davis's number. He replied, I don't know, Paul Pot. So that's book number 1, Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. Next book I read, and of course this is part of the amazing aspect of this whole deal, is the fact that it was on the library's new bookshelf immediately beside, by the Dewey numbers, immediately beside Catch and Kill. They wouldn't be side by side when the books are in the regular circulation area of the library. The numbers aren't that close, but here they are in the new bookshelf area. So the next book I read was The Rule by Larry Hite. It's about investing, and in case you're curious, the rule is that when you invest, you should not put at risk more than 2% of your investment capital. So in that book, on whatever page this is, Mr. Hite writes, I recently visited Cambodia and saw the killing fields where Pol Pot slaughtered up to 3 million people. So by now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these books are side by side. And then with the next one, which is over in the regular circulation shelving area, I found myself thinking, I am being chased around the library by the former and deceased cruel dictator of Cambodia, because the next book I read was the library book by Susan Orlean, which is a combination of her investigation into the arson fire or accidental fire that largely destroyed the main branch, downtown branch of the Los Angeles Public Library. They had that building closed for 6 years or 8 years. Destroyed about 400,000 books and damaged 600,000 more. It's a combination of that and her writing about her own personal background growing up with how important her hometown library was, and she writes about how taking her young son to the library after they'd moved, she was from Cleveland, and when they moved to Los Angeles, she for a while never visited the library, but then she had to take her son to the library for a school project, and then she became it rekindled her love of libraries, and then she was came to want to investigate that arson or accidental burning of the library. She just hasn't been determined. She didn't determine which was the case. She kind of leans toward the accidental explanation as opposed to the arson, which of course they did arrest the fellow for arson, but they weren't sure he did it. And then it also speaks to the whole importance of the particular importance of the Los Angeles, because she tells us a lot about the personnel she got to know there in the Los Angeles library. So, in the library book, she writes, more recently, the Khmer Rouge threw the books of the Cambodian National Library on the streets and burned them. Only 20% survived. So yeah, this is getting really, really spooky now, all these Pol Pot references in the books. Now, the fourth book I have not yet read. I've read little snippets of it over the months since I've owned it. I bought this book at the library's book sale a couple of years ago, in fact, and I've read little snippets of it here and there over the years, written by Thomas Friedman from the New York Times, and he writes a lot. Now, how this came into it was after I'd read the library book. Then I went downstairs one day when I was downstairs. I just picked this book up off the shelf and brought it upstairs, not with any suspicion about this. But once I did have it upstairs, I found myself thinking, I wonder, because I knew that he'd written about a lot of different situations and people, including political leaders. So I looked back in the index, and sure enough, here referenced on page 559, I have it larger here, from page 559, Pol Pot. So that's 4 in a row, 4 books in a row. And he writes about Pol Pot, he's writing about failed peace negotiations. In other words, the image of Lenin in Zurich, or of Pol Pot or Ho Chi Minh in Paris. And that's where it ends, however, because the next book I am reading now is called What We Talk About When We Talk About Books by Lee Price, and I'm pretty well certain there's not going to be a Pol Pot reference, and well, there could be. There's no index. So I think that's where my Pol Pot story ends. And that, mercifully, gone on much longer than the one at the library, that's for sure. It would not be, I think I would have had the lights turned out on me if I'd gone this long in the library. It did not go well. They were not delighted. As we used to say in situations like this, they were whelmed. They might say underwhelmed. I don't know. I'm going to be optimistic and say that they were whelmed. That's it. That's the whole deal.